Hello, everybody. If you can hear me, would you let me know in the chat box, please? Okay, awesome. Looks like we are good. There we go. Hi. I'm excited you're here. Welcome. We got a couple of minutes before we get started, so I would love to hear where in the world you are and what grade you teach. I know some of you might be getting a lot of snow. My two best friends are in the Chicago area, and they were telling me how cold it was and that they wanted to visit me here in Tennessee, but it's kind of cold here too. So hopefully you're staying warm. Hey, Lori. Hey, Marcy. Antoinette, welcome. Nancy. Daniel, welcome. Darlene. Darlene and Charlene. Lisa from Lafayette, welcome. My sister-in-law lives there. Patty, welcome. Gina, welcome. Melinda in Missouri teaches first and second grade. Perfect. Ashley says video is restricted. Rebecca says wants to move to Tennessee soon. You should. It's usually pretty warm. Tanya says just south of Chicago. School out next 3 days. Holy cow. Amy, hey Amy, also in Tennessee. No snow. We're supposed to get some tonight. Francis in South Carolina, welcome. Lisa in Clarksville, welcome. K2 academic coach, that's awesome. Lisa says Lisa's in Chicago and it's cold. First grade teacher. Hey Judy from Maine. Literacy specialist, co-teaching with a first-year teacher. Awesome. Kim, closed Tuesday and Wednesday due to cold. Kara, reading interventionist in Tennessee. Welcome, Kara. Allison, Minnesota, but it's cold there. Lots of no school I'm seeing. Hey, Lisa, Jenny, Jean. Hey, Teresa. Kirsten, bilingual teacher. Awesome. Victoria in Miami. Wish I was in Miami right now. Welcome. Kylie in Ontario, welcome. I know I'm missing some people, just lots of scrolling here. Mindy, also in Illinois. I feel like we have a lot of Illinois teachers tonight. Ruby's in Hawaii. That sounds amazing. She's a librarian. Awesome. Alyssa says it's cold in Florida. Elaine in Jamaica, teaching grade 2. Hi, Lynette. Glad you can make it. Melinda, welcome. Marnie, instructional coach. Awesome. So much snow in Ontario, I bet. Newfoundland, Noel, welcome. Have had snow since October. Myra in Ashboro, awesome. Nikki, welcome. Megan in Hampton Beach. All right, well, it's that time, so I want to respect your time and go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for coming. I'm excited that you are going to spend the next hour-ish with me. And I've been looking forward to this workshop for a while. I know some of you have been waiting for a while, been signed up for a while. So I'm excited to chat with you about reading strategies. Just to recap, you're in the right place if you work with first or second grade students or students who read at that level and you teach them reading strategies, because that's what we are going to focus on tonight. So let me go ahead and let's see, share my screen. So now you should be able to see the first slide of my presentation, and you should be able to see me. If you're coming in, welcome. You're not late. Feel free to let us know where you teach and where you are in the world, or what you teach and where you are in the world. All right. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get going. Google Chrome is what they recommend for the browser. If something's not working, you can always go back to the email and reconnect should we get cut off. I always have a bunch of backup plans in case something goes wrong on my end. So if something ever does, fingers crossed that it doesn't, just hang in there. I'll be back. And you can always reconnect. There should be a reconnect button on the bottom, but otherwise they recommend using the Google Chrome browser. Hopefully we shouldn't have a problem tonight, but sometimes the chat does get really crowded and then people are not able to type. If this happens to you, I apologize. Just wait a couple minutes and try again. Hopefully all will go smooth in terms of technology, but keep that in mind in case something does go wrong. There is a delay between what you're hearing me say now, because I actually said it 20 seconds ago, so something to keep in mind for the chat. And speaking of the chat, please feel free to continue using it. Ask questions, add on to what I'm saying. share ideas, all that good stuff. We have over 500 teachers now in our little virtual room, so everybody can learn from each other. So the chat is nice for that. For me, I will miss things. It's absolutely not intentional. It's just because the chat scrolls and I'm trying to share all this information with you. But I do pause periodically to make sure that I try to pick up questions. And then at the end, you can always re-ask any questions that I missed, because I will make lots of time for questions at the end. So I think that's it. We are ready to get going. All right, so I feel like I know a lot of you recognize a lot of names. So if you've been in a workshop with me before, I'm excited that you're back for more, and I'm sorry that you have to listen to me introduce myself again. But if we don't know each other, thanks for being here. My name is Allison, and I'm a literacy specialist. I now work with students anywhere from pre-K through 5th grade. My classroom teaching experience was in pre-K, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd, so really primary focused. I live in the suburbs of Nashville with my husband, Jonathan. We have 2 little fur babies, Max and Lindsay. In my spare time, I love to read books that have nothing to do with teaching, love to be outdoors in warm weather, not cold weather. So that's me. But beyond all that personal stuff, I wanted to share a little bit about why I do these workshops. Some of you know that I do a lot of these workshops and I really enjoy them. I also have a blog called Learning at the Primary Pond, and I have a Teachers Pay Teachers store. And I work part-time in my job as a reading specialist so that I have time to support teachers like you with all of these things. And the reason that I'm so passionate about helping other teachers and serving other teachers is because at times I've had a really hard time with teaching in the classroom. I felt like I didn't have the resources I needed, or I had to go out and seek all this information on my own. I didn't feel well prepared. I've been overwhelmed, stressed out, and just feeling like no matter how many hours I put in, it wasn't enough for my students. So I just wanted to share that, and that I do these webinars and everything else that I do, the blog and all that stuff, not because I'm a perfect teacher or anything close to it, or not because there's anything magical or extraordinary about me, but I went through all of this stuff, and I would like to help you skip over some of the challenges and do what you were meant to do, which is teach. And all of you that are here tonight, I just want to thank you for being here. You already, just by showing up and spending an hour of your free time, your personal time being here, your schools and your kids are really lucky to have you. So I appreciate you. All right, so this is, sorry, my mouse is like acting funny. This is our agenda for tonight. First, we're going to start off by talking about just some general important things to know about teaching reading strategies, kind of a framework for everything else that we talk about. I'm going to talk next about some strategies for whole group reading strategy lessons, and some, ways to engage your kids, maybe do something a little different. We're going to talk then about implementing strategy small groups, so teaching reading strategies in the small group setting. We're going to talk a little bit about one-on-one reading conferences, and then we're going to kind of wrap up that part of the presentation by talking about integrating whole group, small group, and individual instruction, like what that can look like across the day. And I'm going to give you a little tip to hopefully help save you time and sanity. And then at the end, so make sure that you're able to stick around live. I will do my very best to stick to an hour. Sometimes I go a few minutes more, but we're doing a giveaway. And in order to be entered into the giveaway, you have to be here live. So at the end, we're going to do a giveaway, and I'll share some information with you about what the giveaway is, but just a little hint, it's resources to help you implement all of the stuff that we're talking about tonight. And then I will also be sharing the freebie at the end. And like I said before, after every section, I'm going to stop and ask for a couple of questions or see what I missed. And then at the end, there'll be much more time for questions too. So if I miss you in the chat, I apologize, but I will stop periodically and try to answer as many questions as I can. So that is our agenda for this evening. Before we get into the details of whole group and small group and individual instruction, I wanted to share with you 6 things that I feel are important to know about teaching reading strategies in general. And some of these things you might be like, okay, I already know that, but as we go over them, I'd like you to ask yourself 2 questions, even if you feel like you already know this. Number 1, how am I carrying this out in my classroom right now? And number 2, what changes might I need to make in order to carry this out even more effectively? Because I know with me, sometimes when I'm reading something or listening to something, I'm like, oh yeah, I know this already. But when I think about it, I could be applying it better to my teaching. So some of these things might be like, okay, yeah, of course I know this, but just a framework to think about what we're talking about now. So a reading strategy, just to make sure we're all on the same page, a reading strategy is a plan or set of steps that a reader consciously and intentionally applies to improve something like decoding or fluency, comprehension, vocabulary, or even just their ability to enjoy a text. So it's a plan or set of steps intentionally and consciously applied. Sorry, my mouse again is being funky. So to make this concrete, here are some examples of first or second grade appropriate strategies. Just some example. There's tons of strategies out there. So for decoding, here's something that you could teach your kids to do. If they get to a tricky word, see if you can think of a similar word and then use it to help you read the tricky word. So reading by analogy. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, let's think about the words would and could. That O-U-L-D ending is a little tricky, but if they come across would and they know the word could, then they can read by analogy and figure out what it says. Here's an example of a fluency strategy. Skip your eyes ahead to the ending punctuation so you know how the sentence should sound. Fluency. Here's one for comprehension. This is like, you've probably heard me talk about this before if you've been on like a reading focus workshop, but this is probably my favorite comprehension strategy and one that I start using in late first grade or, second half of first grade and all the way on up through with my fifth graders. But comprehension strategy example is plan stopping points to check your own comprehension. So before you read, put sticky notes in your book periodically. And then when you get to one, stop and retell. If you can't retell, go back and reread. And this is especially helpful with, I'm not going to get too far into this now because I'm just giving you some examples, but this comprehension strategy is so helpful with kids that have trouble with comprehension because it really puts the ownership on them to, take their sticky notes, plan stopping points, and then check their own comprehension when they get there. I have to do a lot of coaching when I teach this at the beginning, but it's so, so helpful. And then here's an example of a vocabulary strategy. If you come to a word and you don't know what it means, reread the sentence, look at the picture, and try to come up with a definition that makes sense. So those, again, were examples of decoding, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary strategies. There are tons out there. And these sentences are just little summaries of what you might say to kids. Really, when you teach them, you're going to go into a lot more detail. If you're wondering what the difference between reading strategies and reading skills is, the way I think about strategies is they are things that are intentionally applied, like on purpose. On the other hand, a skill is something that the reader does basically automatically without a ton of effort. So this is an example I like to think about. Imagine tax season is coming up, right? Woohoo. Imagine you're reading a really detailed technical document about taxes. So for most of us, that's something that's challenging for us to read. At least it is for me. So when I'm reading something like this, I might have to intentionally apply a strategy. Like I stop and reread every so often to make sure I know what the heck I'm reading about. But then if I'm reading a novel by my favorite author, I'm doing all kinds of things automatically. Like I'm predicting, I'm noticing character traits. There's so much stuff going on in my head that, I'm not necessarily intentionally doing, it's just happening. So that's the main difference between a reading strategy and a skill, that reading strategies are applied consciously and then skills are done just about automatically. So we teach kids strategies so that they can eventually become skills. But sometimes, like I was talking about with the tax document, even we as proficient adult readers have to revert back to a strategy depending on how hard a text is. So that's reading strategies versus reading skills. Sometimes I interchange them accidentally, not say the right thing, but I know a lot of people ask about that. So I wanted to talk about what the difference is there. When it comes to reading strategies, we really want to focus on quality over quantity because there's a billion, helpful strategies out there that we could teach, but we also don't want to overwhelm our kids. And I feel like it's so much better for them to learn a small handful of strategies very well versus like a ton of strategies not very well. Just something to keep in mind. I know you probably know this already, but just, thinking about, I know some of you probably use maybe my shared reading units or guided reading bundles. And in there's a lot of strategies, right? There's a lot of strategies, but they're there for you to choose from. Doesn't necessarily mean that I intend for you to teach them all or use them all. I just want to give you choices. So whether you're using my programs or something totally different, just don't be afraid to pick and choose what strategies work best for your kids, because there's so many out there. And I always feel like quality over quantity is what's important. Another just general tip for teaching reading strategies is to pair them with visuals. So, when our English language learners or students who have special needs, when they're hearing, us talk when we're teaching a strategy, sometimes that's not enough. But if kids are hearing about a strategy and seeing it demonstrated and seeing it paired with the same visual every time, then that's helpful in cementing it for them. Just, you displaying that same visual, like, hey, it just jogs a memory. I've heard this before. This is something I know. It's just helping them make those connections. And I also think it's awesome if the class can create one together. If you're a classroom teacher, maybe use large chart paper or make your own posters. Sometimes I use pre-made ones, because it can save a lot of time. And B, for me, as somebody who works with multiple groups, multiple kids, I am not able to have them come up with a different visual. And so for this strategy, I might have this one for this group and this one for the other group. For me, that's too much. I know I saw some interventionists or other reading specialists in here. So for me, I use the pre-printed ones, but it is great also if you can get your kids to participate in making the strategy visual. That makes it all the more meaningful. But either way, just having that visual, whether it comes from them or it comes from something that you print off, it's helpful. And to display the visuals, there's lots of different options, but maybe you have a strategy bulletin board, or you do mini posters on the wall, or here I just have a binder ring. I bought these at some office supply store and I have strategy cards on them. I don't give, I will give the kids a binder ring to have with them as they read, and I don't load them up with tons. Maybe 3 on a ring is good that they're supposed to be focusing on. Maybe you have some awesome ways of sharing, strategies with your kids. So feel free to share those in the chat box, but there's just a lot of different ways to, pair strategies with visuals as you're teaching them. When we're teaching reading strategies, it's one thing for kids to understand how to actually carry out the strategy, but it's another for them to know when it's useful to apply the strategy. And I think about this a lot because I've written lessons to model reading strategies and everything. And in those lessons, a lot of the time, I, as the teacher, am directing what strategy we're using. And that's fine because we have to model in order for our kids to learn stuff. But we also really have to think about bridging our kids to get to the point where they know when to apply a specific strategy, on their own, because every strategy is not made equal, right? They don't all work in the same situation. So to make that concrete, I prepared this little slide for you, and I'd like you to type in the chat box. You can do all 3 of these, just do the word and then do a little dash for what strategy you would use for it. But I just want you to think about what decoding strategy or strategies would work well for the word net, for the word walking, and for the word mistaken. So go ahead and type a strategy for each word. Maybe there's one that can work for more than one. But let me know in the chat box what strategy you would use to teach each one of the following words, or really what strategy you would model when you were looking with the kids at each one of the following words. It also may depend on your grade level too, right? When 2nd graders see the word net, they may know it immediately, whereas beginning 1st graders may not necessarily know that. Kim, those cards, this is the thing that the cards come from, is actually part of the giveaway tonight. So I will be showing you that later. I have in my Teachers Pay Teachers store, Learning at the Primary Pond, I have a reading workshop toolkit, and I have guided reading bundles, and I have shared reading units, and there's visuals in all of those, but I'll show you more about that later. Okay, so Tess says net, sound it out. Find the root word. Kalina, mistaken, take off the beginning and see taken. Chelsea says finding a smaller word and the bigger word. Chunky monkey. Sherry Scott says roller coaster for net. I'm not sure what roller coaster is. I'm curious to hear what that is. That sounds fun. Syllable break, walking, mistaken, prefix, root word. Exactly. So all of you know this already, but you're going to come up with a different strategy to work with your kids on each one of these words. So for the word net, you might have done sound it out or use a word family, et, et. Then there's walking. You wouldn't want your kids to start going, right? They're not going to be able to sound it out. So maybe you have them cover up the ending with their hand, the ing ending. They read walk and then they add ing. Or maybe they think about a similar word that they know. If they know the word talk, then they could probably figure it out. Then there's mistaken. People were talking about breaking it up into syllables, look for a base word like mistake or taken. So obviously, as the teacher and a proficient reader, that you would apply different strategies to each of these words. But of course, kids don't always know that, right? So during whole group and small group, and of course, when they're on their own, we want to allow opportunities for students to suggest strategies. We have to find a balance between teaching strategies, this is how you do this, and just allowing them sometimes to say, well, this strategy works or this strategy would be good. So that can be hard to find a balance, but just a reminder that we definitely want to dedicate some lessons where maybe we don't have a strategy to teach. We're just reading. And if the kids, stumble on a word they're reading with you, then invite them to figure out what strategy would be best. And of course, whenever we're working on strategies, even though I always start out, telling students when we're first learning it, here's how you use it, this is what you do. The goal, of course, is for the kids to be able to eventually choose a strategy on their own. So a question that I ask my kids over and over again is what are you going to try? What are you going to do when, they get to a word that they don't know? And I have a little one right now who has some anxiety about that. So what we do before we read is we'll list out different strategies that she knows how to do. So I'm still allowing her to choose a strategy, but I'm giving her that support so that she has that comfort to look back at, oh, this is what we're doing, or these are what my options are, but I'm still inviting her to figure out what strategy to use instead of always suggesting something. If I need to back up and add in more support, I feel like it's better to do that later, right? First to try to get them to do it. What are you going to do? What strategy are you going to use? And then if they can't get that, then layer in a little more support and maybe suggest something. And then last but not least, as we're finishing up this little general section about reading strategies, you all know this, but don't forget the big picture, right? Reading isn't just about the strategies. And I know that we all know this, but with all the pressures that are on us as teachers, sometimes it's easy to lose sight of it. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get tunnel vision. If I'm focused on something, like other things kind of fall by the wayside. So just don't forget that you can read a book aloud to kids for enjoyment. You don't have to model any strategies. You can ask a couple comprehension questions and that's it, right? Reading is about enjoying stories and learning things, and we don't want our kids to forget that either, of course. All right, let me see if, thank you all for contributing those strategies. Awesome. Let me see if I missed any questions. I think they may have gotten pushed down by all the strategies, all the awesome strategies. I'm not seeing right now, but feel free to type them in. Anne's asking, what is spot the vowel? So maybe another teacher suggested that. So maybe whoever suggested that can let her know. Renee's asking about the decoding cards. Those come from, I have in my Teachers Pay Teacher store. I'll show you stuff later on. So you'll kind of get to see what all is included. But I have reading workshop toolkits. I have reading strategy complete lessons that have visuals like that. Also my guided reading bundles, there are strategy cards too. But that's part of the giveaway. So I will be showing you more about that later. Okay. Let's talk now about whole group. We're going to kind of go, that was general. Now we're going to go whole group. And then after this, we're going to go small group and then one-on-one. So of course, there's no one right way to teach a strategy mini lesson. And I kind of vary mine a little bit depending on what I'm teaching. But here is kind of how I usually organize my whole group strategy mini lessons. So the first thing I do is I introduce the strategy. Today, I want to show you, how to choose stopping points in your book before you read to check your own comprehension. So I'll just tell the kids what I want them to learn. It does not need to be a mystery. Next, often with decoding strategies, not too much with like comprehension strategies, I might do a little isolated mini practice. I love to give the kids like word cards, whatever, and have a few volunteers come up or like letter cards, have volunteers come up, maybe make a word. And then, you know, I model the strategy like with those kids holding the letters, depending on what it is. So we might do a little bit of isolated practice that's not in a text, but immediately after that, I start reading or rereading part of a text. You don't typically get through a whole book in one sitting when I'm doing a strategy mini lesson because it just takes too long. As I'm reading, I model the strategy 2 or 3 times, and then we continue to read, and I invite the kids to join in and helping me apply it. And so then by that point, I've finished, you know, the part of the book that I want to read. And after that, I'll restate the strategy. So boys and girls, today I showed you how to, you know, put stopping points in your book and then stop and check your own comprehension there. A lot of times I will, if I feel like the kids can restate it, the strategy, I'll try to get them to say it in their own words. A really simple thing to do is just say, okay, what strategy do we work on today? Turn and tell your partner. So they talk about it, and then I'll have kids share out, and then I'll restate the strategy again. And then last but not least, I try to tell them when to apply it. So when you're reading, if you get to a word that you don't know, or if you notice that your reading is slow and you're not understanding the book, do this. So trying to tell them when to apply it. Like we talked about earlier, that's so important that they know when to apply it. And that's kind of how I structure my lessons. But what I want to do is actually walk you through what that sounds like so that you can get a better idea of that. And again, there's no one right way to do this, but this is just kind of my personal preference. Okay, so I am going to actually run through a fluency lesson, and this comes from my first grade shared reading units. Don't worry about writing down every word or anything because I actually have this entire lesson for you in the freebie that I'm going to be sharing at the end. I have it all typed out. It's straight out of my shared reading unit. This will sound a little bit different because I just, I'm talking to you, and obviously there's no students here in front of me, but you will have this lesson to take and keep. And I believe I gave you the visual too in the freebie. This is the visual that goes with the lesson. I have all my stuff here. So you'll be getting, oops, sorry if I hit the mic. You'll be getting that. And all right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk to you as if you were my students. So apologize for my voice that always sounds like I'm talking to 6-year-olds, but here's how I would introduce the lesson. So the strategy is slow down to figure out a tricky word and then speed back up. And this strategy is really great for those kids who do one of two things. One, they don't slow down. They just like breeze right through a word and they don't really stop to figure out what it says. Or those kids who slow down to figure something out, but then they just keep reading super slow and they don't speed back up. So that's who this lesson is good for. This is one that I love to teach in 1st and 2nd grade. Okay, boys and girls, 1st graders. The strategy that I want to teach you today reminds me of driving a car over a speed bump. Has anyone ever driven over a speed bump? Yeah? What happens when you do that? And so hopefully they'll say that you like slow down and you go over the bump slowly and you feel it. So I'll ask something like, do you keep driving at the same speed when you get to a speed bump, or do you slow down? You slow down, right? So then I invite them to turn on their imaginary cars. All right, let's turn on our imaginary cars for a minute. Are you ready? Turn on the engine, vroom, vroom. Okay, so we're driving along. Oh no, we see a speed bump. Let's hit the brakes and slow down. Eee! Bump, bump. Okay, now we're over the speed bump. Do we keep going slow? Hopefully they'll say, no, speed back up. Yeah, that's right, we speed back up. Okay, great job, drivers. You can turn off your cars now. So silly, but that's how I kind of like introduce this concept. So then I pull out the text, and this could be something that if I'm teaching fluency, this is probably a text that we've read before, that we, Monday, Tuesday, maybe we got through this book and now it's Wednesday and we're working on fluency, because typically when I read a book with kids for the first time, then I'm going to want to focus on comprehension. So this is kind of like a Wednesday lesson. We've already read this book. Okay, so then I'd say something like, that was kind of silly, right? The reason why we are talking about speed bumps today is because reading can be a lot like driving. We read along at a good pace, not too fast and not too slow, but then when we hit a tricky word, that's kind of like a speed bump. We have to slow down to figure it out, but then we speed right back up again. So as we read today, I'm going to show you a few different times how I use this strategy. What we're going to do is we're going to take turns reading pages. So I'll read the first page, and then you all can read the second page, and then we'll go back and forth like that. So this is a good thing you can do when maybe it's like Wednesday and you've read your book or your text a couple times already. You want to invite the kids to really join in. But if you take turns reading pages, then you can still model a strategy if you need to. All right, so then I'd start reading my book, and I would just kind of, I'm trying to think. So I'd have, this is hard to show, but I'd have it displayed under the document camera so they could see it. Honeybee, animals use their eyes to see the world. A bee has 5 eyes, blah, blah, blah. And then on this line, I'm going to model it for you. So 2 large eyes are on the sides of its, oh no, I don't know that word. That's okay, but I need to slow down, right? I don't skip over it. This tricky word is just like a speed bump. I stop for a second, I go slow, I figure it out, and then I speed back up again. Head. 2 large eyes are on the sides of its head. These eyes can see objects. These eyes can see objects. Okay, so I would do that twice. So again, we're going back and forth reading pages. So I read this page, the kids read the next page, and then I make sure that I model it at least 2 times, maybe 3 if it's a brand new strategy for them. But both of those examples, I'm just pointing out that I'm using the strategy, I'm modeling it, I'm thinking aloud. That think aloud that I did wasn't fantastic, but it usually goes a little better when I'm in front of kids. But so when it's their turn to read the book, if you hear kids, kind of like misreading a word or not joining in as the group of kids is chorally reading, then you want to say, oh, I hear a speed bump word. Let's slow down, figure it out, and then we'll move on. So you want to get the kids to also apply. And the going back and forth with alternating pages is a great way to do that. You don't even necessarily have to read with them when they're reading. You can, but you can kind of listen to them and then, keep your ear out for those speed bump words, and also encourage the kids to notice, hey, this word is tricky. We're going to treat it like a speed bump. Let's slow down, figure it out, and then we'll go again. So we probably would not reread this whole text. We would probably read about half of it. And then when we're done, I would do a little summary. And I would say something like, today I told you that tricky words are like speed bumps. And I'd refer back to the visual. What did I mean by that? And so the kids could talk to a partner. We discuss it as a class, just so I make sure they get the connection between speed bump and what they should be doing in their reading. And so then I'd invite them to apply this on their own. And so I'd say something like, when you're reading on your own, you're going to find some words that are tricky for you. And that's a good thing. It means that you're growing as a reader. When you get to one of those words, don't just speed right over it, right? You want to take a second, slow down, figure out the word, and then speed your reading back on up again. So then I would want to have this visual available to them. Maybe it's displayed in the classroom. Maybe I have something on a little ring like I showed you earlier. I want to make sure that I'm following this up with more reinforcement and showing them that strategy and encouraging them to use it on their own. So that was an example of a whole group strategy lesson. Again, lots of great ways to do that, but hopefully that was helpful to kind of see it. I know it's different because we don't have kiddos here and it doesn't flow exactly the same, but hopefully that was helpful. And so next, I just wanted to cover some ideas that are really helpful in engaging kids during the guided practice portion of your lessons. For this particular lesson, it was kind of simple. I just had the kids take turns reading pages with me and had them apply the strategy. But you can get them more involved too, depending upon what strategy it is. So I mentioned turn and talks are great, especially when you're having kids like restate a strategy, but also let's say, you're reading a book or you're showing them a word. Instead of just having them raise their hand and call out, turn and tell your partner what strategy you would use to figure out this word. So actually talking through the strategy with a partner. Another thing you can have them do is, let's say that you've taught this strategy and they know it okay, but you want them to figure out when to apply a certain strategy. So, I'll tell them, okay, we're going to read this chunk of the book. I want you to raise your hand and tell me when we should, for example, go back and reread because you don't understand. Or I want you to tell me when you get to a vocabulary word and you don't know what it means, just raise your hand. So getting them more involved in figuring out when to apply what strategies, just raise their hand. So simple, but it's something to get them engaged in your shared reading. Something else you can do, and this takes a little bit more time, but as the year goes on, they get a little bit faster with their writing, You can have them write or draw something on a sticky note or a half sheet of paper. So maybe, you're using that comprehension strategy that I mentioned earlier where the kids are stopping and summarizing. Maybe they write a summary sentence, or maybe they're just doing something like making predictions and you have them write a couple of predictions as you read. You're reading, you have them on the rug still. I like to have them close to me and you're reading the book. They can see it, but periodically you stop and they write something down. Again, it does take a little bit more time. It's not something I do with first graders at the beginning of the year, but it's an option for you. Another thing that you can have them do is actually bring the book that they're reading to the carpet, or the book that they plan to read that day. So in anticipation of this, you have them bring it, and then, maybe you do a shorter lesson, but then you say, okay, I want you to just take a minute and look through the book that you're going to read and see, are there any words that look tricky to you? Or are there any words that, are new? You don't know what they mean. So that's actually having them practice right in the book that they're reading exactly what you've been talking about. And that's ideal, right? It may not work for every strategy, but when it does, I do like to have my kids actually bring a book and then practice it right then and there before they go off and read. Another thing you can do is hand motions. So let's say we're working, and you can just make up whatever, but let's say you're working on fluency and you want your kids to pay attention to the ending punctuation. Is it a period? Is it an exclamation point? You could do something like that. Or is it a question mark, right? You want their eyes to skip ahead to the punctuation to help them figure out how to make their voice sound. So maybe when you show them a page of the book, okay, show me what punctuation marks you see right away. This, right? You can just kind of engage them in some kind of movement. And you can apply this to more than just punctuation marks, but again, it's a way to get them actively involved. Another thing, and you probably do this already, but it's just choral reading or rereading rather than you reading all of the text. I know like with second graders, sometimes it feels kind of funny to do a lot of choral reading. So, maybe I'll read part of it and then they'll read part of it, just like I was doing with that book example. Or maybe you just have them choral read like part of the text with lots of expression if that's what you're working on. Very simple, but it's just a way to get kids actively involved during your guided practice or whatever you're reading together. So I just wanted to talk briefly too about some logistics for whole group strategy instruction. I get asked a lot of questions like, do you read the entire book or do you just read part of it? What about rereading the book? And so here's kind of what I do. And it does depend on the book and what we're doing, but I have a book like this. This is one that I believe I use throughout the whole week. And on Monday, we read the first half and we work on usually comprehension strategy. Second day, Tuesday, we read the second half and we're usually like extending that comprehension strategy or maybe doing something a little different, but the focus is on comprehension because it's the first time that we read the book. And then on Wednesday, that's a great opportunity to come back to the book, work on a fluency strategy, work on something that makes sense to practice now that the kids know all about the content. And then on Friday, maybe I'll pull in another really short text, or maybe we'll reread part of it again. Or if it's a story, maybe we'll act it out. There's different things you can do with it, but I feel like there's a lot of value in rereading books because kids don't, the first time you read a book, you do want the kids to really be focused on the meaning. And so if you're always throwing new books in, then when is their attention freed up to focus on things more like, fluency or other kind of strategies? So sometimes I will read more than one book in a week with them, depending on what it is, but often we do a lot of rereading. Another question that I get asked, and this is a great question, is do you teach like one strategy per day? And are they different strategies like, strategy A on Monday, strategy B on Tuesday, or one strategy multiple days in a row, like predicting. And my answer is I do some of both. So the way I do this is, if it's like I was talking about earlier with the Monday, Tuesday, read half of it Monday, read half of it Tuesday. We might be working on a comprehension strategy on Monday or on Tuesday, and on Tuesday could be the same strategy, but then maybe we do something different on Wednesday and Thursday. It could be that we have, if it's like shorter, we could have, one strategy per day and we're rereading the same text for a couple of days. It just kind of depends on the book. The reason sometimes I'm like, well, I feel like we should be working on the same strategy for multiple days. The reason why in practice it doesn't usually work for me to do that is because you're always having to introduce a new book. So while I do like to hit on a strategy a couple days in a row to really reinforce it, especially those harder comprehension strategies, it doesn't always work out, but I do try to revisit strategies. So, if I teach them something, some fluency strategy on Wednesday, and we're not going to maybe hit it again on Thursday, but then the next week we'll revisit it, or 2 weeks later we'll revisit it. For those harder strategies, the essential ones, I do try to revisit those frequently. And if I can have, multiple days in a row of it. I know that was kind of like a long answer to that question, but it really depends a lot on the book, and it depends on what strategies that you're teaching. All right. Patricia, for hand motions, I honestly just make mine up. I have not read about them anywhere. I'm sure there's some out there, but I'm not sure I can give you a good reference of where to look. Sorry. Rebecca says, wouldn't it depend on the book? Fiction is easier to read through in one day. Nonfiction is more complex. Yeah, it definitely just depends on the book, for sure, with how long you spend on it, how many different strategies you use with it, all that stuff. Antoinette, so with my English language learners, I do try to incorporate movement. Like I mentioned with the punctuation and stuff, we do act stuff out. All the stuff that you mentioned, yes. I'll try to keep thinking about any other strategies that I didn't mention. Melinda says, my higher kids use sticky notes to write down their questions or things they notice. Awesome. Yes, Lisa, whole brain teaching has gestures. Yes, awesome. Okay, I know I missed a couple of questions, but I want to make sure that we get to the giveaway and kind of stay on track with time. So I'm going to keep rolling, and then do feel free to ask them again later. Now I want to talk about implementing strategy small groups. So we just talked about whole groups and our whole group instruction, and often we want to teach strategies, review strategies, work on strategies in a small group setting. So that's what we're going to talk about now. I know many of us probably use or at least have heard of strategy groups, and a strategy group is teacher-led small group instruction that's designed to show students how to implement one specific strategy. And I teach these to a group of kids who, I should say group of students, not student, who all need to work on a specific strategy. And these kids don't necessarily have to be reading all on the same level. And if that sounds funky to you, I'm going to show you what that can look like, so not to worry. Strategy groups are a little bit different from guided reading. When you have a guided reading group, the kids are reading more or less, hopefully, at about the same instructional level. They all have the same text, and they're all working in the same level of difficulty. With strategy groups, they actually don't all have to be reading at the same level. And a perk of this is that you can kind of change things up to where kids may always be with their guided reading group, guided reading group, guided reading group. You can allow them a chance to work with other kids in the class when you do strategy groups. Another perk of this is if you have a couple of really high-flying kids, but they're not at the same level, you can do this with them. And it makes it a little bit easier to involve them in small group, if they're kind of all over the place in terms of what their levels are and they're not on the same page. But these really are good for all kids, not just high flyers, good for your lower students too. They can work with students that they maybe don't have a chance to work with otherwise, because there's all kinds of kids in these groups. But anyway, a strategy group is usually about 10 to 15 minutes long, kind of like the same length as a guided reading lesson. I'm going to run through how I teach a small group strategy lesson and also give you an example of what that could look like. Again, oh my goodness, I can't number. Look, this is 1, 3, 5. All right, I guess that's why I'm a reading specialist and not a math specialist. Good grief. Anyway, these are the 3 steps or the 3 parts that I usually include in my small group strategy lessons. And, you can do these pretty much anyway, but this is what feels most comfortable to me. They're kind of similar to a whole group mini lesson, but I try to include a lot more independent student practice instead of teacher talk time. I want these groups to be like about the kids practicing a strategy, not me going on and on and on. Okay, so the first thing I do in the small group is I'll state the strategy. I'll explain why it matters, how it's connected to what we've been working on. So, we've been working on using the text feature. So today I want to teach you how to read, or how to use I don't think this book has captions, but how to use the captions along with the rest of the text in your books. And we've been working on nonfiction or whatever. So then what should say number 2, I will do some kind of modeling or demonstration. I like to use a familiar text because then it doesn't become about like the content of the text. Like they're not trying to comprehend it. They already know it. And the modeling or demonstration part will be pretty short because, again, I don't want to focus on teacher talk. I want it to be about them practicing. So number 5, aka number 3, is that the kids practice the actual strategy that we just worked on, and they can use their own books. Once in a while, I'll pull an easier text that they can all read, but it usually works best if they use their own books that they're reading, and then I'm there to coach them. So that's really where this differs from guided reading. In guided reading, I choose the book, I'm passing it out. In strategy lessons, they're typically bringing their own books and they're applying what we've been working on to their own reading. So these are a really good way to bridge, whole group, like this is what we're working on in whole group, and this is what they should be doing on their own. Because sometimes it can be hard, right, to get them to do what you've been working on in whole group, like to actually apply it. And so strategy groups are a really good way to bridge these two. Okay, so here's my example strategy, small group lesson for 2nd grade. And the vocabulary strategy is, if you don't know what a word means, use context to figure out a definition, put that definition back in the sentence, and then see if it makes sense. So the little example here is, if a child is reading, she felt mortified after she fell off her bike in front of the kids, they could infer she felt very embarrassed after she fell off her bike in front of all the kids. She felt very embarrassed when she couldn't write the numbers 1, 2, 3 and numbered 1, 3, 5. But so this is an example of a vocabulary strategy that I use pretty frequently with 2nd graders. So one thing I want to mention before I get into the demonstration of this lesson is that if you have kids and you're teaching vocabulary strategies, if you have kids who don't even notice when they know what a word or when they don't know what a word means, you want to make sure that they are able to recognize that first, because this lesson is not going to be useful to them unless they're able to be reading and be like, oh, I don't know what that word means. Just noticing that they don't know the definition of a word is a really important first step. So these kids that I'm pulling in my imaginary demonstration small group, they know how to do this already, and they're ready to move on from that to actually figuring out what the word means. Okay, so let's imagine I have a small group of kids in front of me, and there are different reading levels, but we're working on the strategy. This is something that would benefit all of them. So I might say to them, all of you have been doing such a great job noticing when you read a word that's new to you. You might be able to say the word, but then you think to yourself, I'm not exactly sure what that means. And that's awesome. Today, I'm going to show you one strategy that you can use to figure out what the word means. I'm going to show you how I come up with a possible definition and then put it back into the sentence to make sure that I'm correct. So that's how I kind of introduce things. By the way, a version of this lesson is in your freebie. I believe the version that you're going to see is for whole group, but you can very easily adapt it to be small group. So you are going to have not all of, but a lot of this lesson written out. Okay, so we're with my small group. I just introduced the strategy, and now I want to model it a little bit. So this is the book that I brought to model it. And I'd say, so ideally this is something that we've read already as a class. And I'll say, let's look at an example from this book that I've been reading. So on this page, a bully just knocked the character Pinky off his bike, and a neighbor lady, Mrs. Morgan, came over to help Pinky. Remember that part? Because they've heard this before. So then I'll read, "Stop that. You leave him alone," a voice called out. Pinky recognized it as Mrs. Morgan's. Now his cheeks really burned. It was embarrassing enough to be bullied, but to be saved by an old woman made it even worse. "It's okay, Mrs. Morgan," Pinky said, scrambling to his feet. I just fell off my bike." So when I was reading this for the first time, boys and girls, I wasn't sure what scrambling meant, but I just finished reading the whole paragraph to see if I could find some clues. And when I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, okay, so I know Pinky's on the ground, and I'm thinking that scrambling means quickly getting up pretty fast. So let me put that definition back in the sentence and see if it makes sense. So let's try that. It's okay, Mrs. Morgan, Pinky said, quickly getting up to his feet. Quickly getting up to his feet. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's pretty close to what scrambling means. So then I would turn to another page and I would say, okay, this is another example of how I use this strategy. So this part of the book says, how come you're always playing with girls? Kevin asked, wrapping his arms around the ball. Pinky glanced over his shoulder at Rex. Now, when I read this for the first time, I wasn't sure what glanced meant, but I finished reading the whole paragraph again to see if I could find some clues. And I'm thinking that glanced means looked. So let me put that definition back in the sentence and see if it fits. Pinky looked over his shoulder at Rex. Yeah, I think that makes sense. So now I've modeled it twice, right? They've seen me do it. And what I would do now is I already picked out a part for them to practice. And they have heard the book before, and that's okay, but this is not something that we talked about whole group, so I don't feel like they're automatically going to know it. And so, where is it? I'd be reading, and the target word is scowled. So I'd read a little bit before and a little bit after to kind of give them some context, and I'd say, what do you think the word scowled means? Like, what would make sense? And so then I'd have them come up with a couple of different definitions, and we'd try them all in there. Again, not just rereading that one sentence, but the whole kind of paragraph, small paragraph, and I would have them decide if their definition made sense or not. So that's kind of a little bit of guided practice, and I try to keep that part pretty quick because what I really want them to do is actually practice with their own books. So now what I would say, and this is kind of the last part of the lesson, now I want you to pick up a book that you've been reading, so they would have had their book bags with them. And I just want you to keep reading. But when you get to a word that's new to you, I want you to stop and grab a sticky note. So I'd have like sticky notes in the middle of the table for them. Then I'd say, then I want you to try to figure out what that word means. Come up with a definition, put it back in the sentence, just like we practiced. And then if it works, write the word and the definition on your sticky note. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Just try another definition and see if you can come up with something that makes sense. So by this point, my second graders would read for a few minutes and I'd support them. Hopefully, that's the one hard thing about strategy groups is you don't always know what they're reading. Hopefully they're going to come to a word and they don't know what it means. And then, you can have them take the sticky note, write on it the definition or whatever, and you're just there basically to coach them through practicing that strategy. Now, if you have a strategy that you feel like, I really don't know if this is going to apply to their books, then you can take a text that you, for example, with this vocab strategy, they're going to be able to read most of it, but there's going to be some words that are new to them. Readworks.org has some, shorter passages that you can pull for something like this. So at times I do specify the text for a strategy lesson if I'm not sure that the kids are going to be able to use it in their books. But like with this strategy, the vocabulary one, I did feel like they were going to be able to come to a word and not know what it meant relatively easily. So that's why I had them use their own books. Now at the end, I might do a wrap up or I might just kind of dismiss them depending on what the rest of the kids are working on one by one. Once I feel like they've got the strategy, then I'm okay if they go and read independently. Or if it's like we're all switching at a certain time, then I'll, bring them back. What did we practice today? Have them tell each other and even share with each other how they use the strategy in their own reading as long as time permits. Okay. So I hope that example was helpful. Again, that the lesson, it's not a small group lesson, it's whole group. You can adapt it, and that is also going to be in your freebie. But to figure out who needs to work on what strategy, right? That's a thing. Like with guided reading, okay, these kids are reading at a level D, so I'm going to pull them together. These kids are reading at this, I'm going to pull them together. Strategy groups aren't exactly like that. So generally what I do is I like to do reading instruction in units, and beforehand I know what strategies are most important that I'm going to be teaching, and I put those strategies on some kind of class checklist where I can write, it's a full page, I just cropped it, but you can write all the kids' names going down. You can make notes about how they're doing with the different strategies. And so then once you have some notes about all the kids, you can see like, oh, well, these kids are struggling with this strategy because I can look down my class checklist and see that. And so this class checklist really, it serves two purposes. One, it keeps me focused on what I'm supposed to be teaching. And then 2, it also just helps me see like which kids could be in each group to pull my strategy small group. So hopefully that's helpful. These do come from my shared reading units, which is part of the giveaway. I'll be telling you about that at the end. But you can also, if you're using other units, just create your own. It's just helpful to have those in front of you the whole time you're teaching a unit to refer back to. Okay, so real quick, guided reading is another important type of small group. Probably most of us do this, but it can feel like a lot if you're trying to balance both guided reading and strategy small groups. There's no one right way to balance them. So I'm just going to throw out some different options, and hopefully you'll find one that you feel like can work for you if you're struggling with balancing the two. So one thing you can do is just say, okay, Monday through Thursday, I'm going to do guided reading. And then on Friday, I'm going to pull a few strategy groups. You're not going to be able to see all your kids probably in one day unless you have like not a huge class, but that's okay. Maybe you hit them next week. Excuse me. Another option is to just kind of do your strategy groups as needed. Like most of the time you're doing guided reading and then you got your class checklist. You see like, okay, these kiddos need to work on this. And then you take a day off and do strategy groups. So it could just be as an ad needed basis. Another thing you can do is maybe you do a lot of guided reading, but then you're like, okay, we got to do some strategy groups. And you just spend like 3 days and you only see strategy groups those days. Then you go back and do guided reading for a couple of weeks and then you do some strategy groups. Basically whatever works for you. I don't think there's like one right way of doing this, but hopefully one of those ideas will resonate with you. Okay, I apologize. I am going to skip questions right now just because I see that we're getting close and I want to make sure that we stick to as close as possible to an hour so we can do our giveaway. So far we've talked about whole group, small group strategy instruction, and I do a little bit of strategy instruction in my one-on-one reading conferences also. So I wanted to talk a bit about that. Typically in the past, I haven't had a ton of time for reading conferences, but you know, even though I have like a centers block and we're doing guided reading at that point and I'm seeing small groups, I do like to set aside, even if it's just 10 minutes, a time for the kids to read silently or whisper read, depending on what age group they're in. But I use that time so that A, everybody's quieter and they can focus, whereas sometimes during centers it gets a little louder. And B, that's the time I use to do my reading conferences. It's okay if I only have like 10 minutes and I don't get a ton in, maybe like 2. But I feel like it's important to check in with them one-on-one. So in a one-on-one conference, I sit down with one student and I discuss the book that the child is already reading. So they're reading this and we're talking about strategies that work well with this book. So it's very contextual. It's very relevant to what they're reading. I use an observe, complement, teach structure, and I'll go in depth on each one of those things on the next slides. One-on-one conferences are great for giving kids personal attention and also monitoring what students are choosing to read. So this is why I feel it's so important to make time for them, even if you can't get a ton in. If you're not really able otherwise to see like what kids have in their book boxes or their book bags, and if they're actually able to read them, like that could be a waste of the kids' time if they're just sitting there and pretending to read. So I know, of course, you kind of know what kids can and can't read, and you can go through their book boxes or their bags after they're gone. But it is nice to have that chance to sit down with them and talk about what they're choosing to read. So that's one advantage of the conferences. Conferences are usually 3 to 5 minutes long. I am bad at this. I usually have to have a timer to cut it off so I don't go on too long. And then if you're using conferences, I would encourage you just not to stress too much about how many you can fit in. I remember this was years ago, the first time I wanted to do conferences, I had this whole checklist and I was like, I'm going to get to all these kids on these days and blah, blah, and it just fell apart every week. So I feel like just think about what's realistic and, I'll try to get in 2 a day. That's okay. Even if I have 20 kids, I'm seeing them in a small group setting in addition to the conferences. This is just kind of like an added bonus. So I try not to stress too much about it. So I mentioned that I followed the observe, complement, teach structure. I did not make this up. I learned it from, I don't know who originally invented this, but Jennifer Sarah, I don't know if it's Saravallo or Jennifer Saravallo, writes about this procedure, this observe, complement, teach structure in some of her work. But step one is to observe. And so there's different ways that you can do this to kind of figure out how they're doing with their reading. What are they reading? What strategies are they using? You can ask them to read aloud. That's an option, but you don't have to. You might just ask them, like, what are you reading about today, to kind of check comprehension? Or what strategies have been helpful to you today? Checking in to see, are they applying what you've been asking them to in their own reading? Or even just, why did you choose this book? Like getting inside their head, like what interested them? Can you help them find other related books that might interest them? Or difficulty level, is it way too hard? Is it way too easy? Do you need to give a little guidance in that or some reminders? So these are all ways that you can kind of invite them into the conference. I don't make my kids come to me. I go to them, because when they're spread out in the room and they're reading silently, it's just faster if I go to them. I typically have a conferring bag that I bring with me, any stuff that I need. So that makes it quick. I just pick up and go. In a conference, during the observation part, you may be going into it being like, okay, I know that I want to work with this child on such and such strategy. And you may have that in your mind to begin with, but you may also want to see what unfolds. Sometimes I don't have something in mind, and I just kind of want to see, like, what are their responses to these questions, or how does their oral reading sound? So, sometimes I have a purpose already set, and sometimes I just kind of see what happens in this observation component. So then is the compliment portion, and this is not just paying them lip service. This compliment builds that relationship, makes them feel good, but it also helps reinforce what they are working on and encourages them to keep doing it. So I noticed that you, you made your voice sound just like the character was feeling. This helps you really get that mental, I was going to say video, but what do kids, mental movie in your head while you're reading. Great job. Keep it up. So specifically naming what they're doing, telling them why it matters, and encouraging them to keep going. It's also really useful to reinforce a past focus. So let's say you worked on something in your previous conference with them. If you can compliment them on it, that they're using it, that's awesome, because that's following up on what you already worked on. And then the last little part, and this stuff happens so fast. The observation is just like a minute or two. The compliment is like 30 seconds. And then we move on to the teaching portion of the lesson. So you want to choose just one thing that you feel like will really make a big difference to their reading. And the way that I choose what to teach is sometimes I will look at my unit goals. I was talking about those class checklists. As long as they're relevant to the student, it's a good idea to kind of loop back and work on what you've been working on with the whole class. Sometimes it's helpful. Maybe you see them sometimes applying a strategy, or they're trying a strategy, but they're not, using it at the right times. Choose that they're kind of doing it okay, but they could be doing it better, and really try to bring them up to the next level before you introduce something new. If you want, during the modeling part, you may want to take out your own book, like I mentioned, your conferring bag, and model it. Maybe you have something prepared, or you just know a book so well that you can whip it out and model something. But then you also want to have the child try it out in their own reading, in the book that they're reading, ideally. And if that won't work, maybe you have your book that you show them and try to get them to practice it. Excuse me. You want them to just practice it in some way, just like with the small group instruction. I like to wrap up then with some kind of goal setting. So, okay, you're going to be working on this strategy. This is small, I know, but this is the strategy little binder ring, little card. I like the little cards because you can give them, maybe the strategy was try a different vowel sound. You can just give that to them, or you put it on their binder ring, and then they have that visual in front of them as they're reading on their own. Oh, this is my goal. This is the strategy I need to work on. Because we all know that sometimes we meet with kiddos, and as well-intentioned as they are to apply it, it goes in one ear and out the other. So sometimes it helps to have that little visual, little reminder with them as they're reading on their own. And I kind of talked about this a little bit when we were talking about the what to teach and your observation, but with conferences, it's so important to come back and follow up. You want to wait till they're secure with one strategy before you launch into another one, because this one-on-one time is your chance to really do it, right? In whole group, in small group, sometimes you have to move on before kids have fully mastered a strategy, just so you can cover maybe certain things that you're expected to teach. But one-on-one, this is your chance to really help them focus on one thing until they've mastered it, and then you can introduce something new when you're meeting with them one-on-one the next time. Again, I'm sorry, I'm going to skip questions for now just because I know we've gone a minute over. Thanks for bearing with me. We are wrapping up here, and we're getting super close to the giveaway. I have like 5 more slides, and then that's it. Really quick, I want to finish up by talking about integrating whole group, small group, and individual strategy instruction so that they're cohesive, so that you can save time, and so that you don't feel like you're trying to teach a million different things to a million different kids all at once, because I know it's really easy to feel that way. One of the most helpful things you can do is just to create continuity between what you're teaching in whole group, what you're teaching in small group, and then any reading conferences that you do. So if you're doing a whole group lesson on a certain decoding strategy in whole group, why not also practice it with kids in small group, right? Whether it's strategy group or guided reading, why not reinforce that? And then maybe when you see kids for reading conferences, reinforce it again. I know this might seem like obvious, but to me, when I was first teaching, I didn't do this. I might have been teaching one thing whole group, another thing in different small groups, and then something totally different one-on-one. So this doesn't always work perfectly, but it is helpful to keep that cohesive focus throughout the day. However, like I said, sometimes it doesn't always work perfectly, and you need to differentiate. Maybe you have like a big range of kids in your class, but what you can do is you can keep your focus on that strategy, but teach similar strategies or supporting strategies that support that main goal. So I made this little graphic to kind of explain this better. Let's say that your whole group strategy is infer the moral or lesson of a story. That's what you're hitting on in your whole group mini lessons, 2nd grade, for example. And that's great for some of your kids, right? And so when you're doing guided reading, maybe some of your kids need to be working on that, just like you did in whole group, and that's fine. But that doesn't work for all of your kids. You might have some really advanced readers. Maybe they can come up with a moral pretty easily. Not a lot of kids can, but maybe you have some really advanced readers. Maybe you take it another step. So you taught that whole group, then you see them in a small group, and you say, okay, well, I want you to infer the moral and explain how you can apply it in your own life. So application. So that's more advanced. But then you can also go down the ladder. There's some kids where, maybe it's like mid-year 1st grade, end of year 1st grade, and you're working on this strategy, and some kids are still reading like level C text. And level C text for guided reading, does not have a lot of meat in it. They probably can't infer the moral or lesson of those stories because there's just not much there. So with them, maybe you work on an easier supporting strategy. Maybe for your low kids, it's just retelling the most important details, because if you can't figure out what the most important details are, then you definitely can't infer the moral or lesson of a story, right? So that would be easier. A little bit easier, but a little bit more challenging than that might be just to make inferences using details from the words and pictures. So, just looking at a picture, how's the character feeling? What's going on here? If they can't do that, then they're not going to be able to infer the moral or lesson of a story. So in your freebie, I have a lot more examples of this for you, but this is just kind of how I think of the ladder of related strategies. Even if I can't work on that target strategy with all of my groups, I can probably work on something related. Then one last little note I have here is, we talked about this before, when you're using visuals, like the ones I was showing you, just have those visuals available throughout whole group, guided reading, strategy groups, independent reading, just showing them over and over again so that they see the continuity between what you're doing during different times in your reading block. All right, so we got through a lot tonight. I apologize for going over time, but it is time for our giveaway. I have shown you some examples of strategy lessons and visuals, and that is part of our giveaway tonight. So I know that not all of us have all the materials that we need in order to teach reading strategy. So this is what the giveaway is. My winners are going to be able to choose either this, they're going to let me know what grade level they want, or this. And so my flexible shared reading lessons are reading strategy lessons. And this is a good choice for you if you need support in the way of complete lesson plans. So when I was teaching those example lessons, those came or were modified from my flexible shared reading unit. So these bundles have complete lesson plans. You can use them for whole group. You can also use them for small group if you want to modify them. They have strategy visuals. They don't have the small cards, but they do have the full page cards. And I believe you can print multiple to a page if that's something you want to do. They have assessment checklists. If you remember those class checklists I was showing you, they've got those. They're done for you. Then they also have some reading response prompts and other little supporting activities. So if you're a giveaway winner, you decide to get this, this is something if you need those complete lesson plans, outlines, a lot of support in teaching reading strategies, or just, even some new ideas for teaching reading strategies if you feel like you're doing the same old thing over and over again. Now, if you need less support and you're like, okay, I've got all my strategy lesson plans and I'm good to go with that, but I want visuals, then these reading workshop toolkits would be a good choice for you because they have a ton of strategy visuals. They have some fun bookmarks for the kids to use while they're reading. There's a couple of assessment tools, not as many as here. And then there's also some conferring prompts to help you get started with your reading conferences. So I want to show you a little more about what's in the shared reading lessons, complete strategy lessons. I've got them for kinder, first, and second grade. So my winners are going to need to email me after I pull the names and let me know what grade you want. And again, you're going to be able to choose from the shared reading lessons or the toolkits. But the purpose of the shared reading units is many purposes. Number one, I wanted to save you planning time in terms of lessons and searching for books. I also wanted to give you flexibility to reorder the lessons if you needed to and use your own books. I give usually 2 suggestions. You could use this or you could use this, or find a book that has this. So you have suggestions, but you also have flexibility. I wanted you to be able to move your kids up reading levels more quickly, to show them the strategies that will make them strong readers and really model it for them. And I also wanted to get your kids excited about reading. There are, the lessons are designed to engage them. Sometimes they act stuff out or there's little follow-up activities. You're teaching reading strategies, but they're also having fun. So as I mentioned, I've got complete lessons. So good for a sub. I can't tell you how many times I've had to be up at 3 in the morning or, when I was sick or doing something to get plans to a sub. You don't have to worry about this. If you have these plans, it's all written out for you. Complete lesson plans and then supporting visuals. These are the full page visuals that you get with these. And as I mentioned, you have different options for text. So, for week 1 in this, it's probably pretty small and you can't see it, but there's a suggested text 1, or you can use this, or you can use any nonfiction text with headings and photos. So you have a lot of flexibility there. There's also bonus writing prompts, activities for the kids, just to keep them excited about what you're doing. Write a book that you think deserves an award, explain why the book is awesome, a character riddle. So integrating the stuff that you're working on, but making it fun for them and giving them a little something they can work on independently too. There's those class checklists that I showed you for every single unit. And I also did it in an individual rubric format so that if you just want to look at one kid at a time and kind of rate how they're doing, you can do that too. And then for my kindergarten and first grade bundles, there's sight words. So for the suggested text, I pulled out sight words. I used the Dolch list for high frequency words. And then I also pulled out vocabulary words that you can teach. You don't necessarily have to use all of these. I just pulled them out for you to save you time. So those were the shared reading units. And then last but not least, we have the toolkits. This is your other option if you're a winner. I have all of this in my TPT store. And the biggest difference between the ones that I just showed you and these are that these do not have any lesson plans. These are just supplemental tools. They're for you if you already have the lesson plans that you need for teaching strategies and you just want visuals and stuff to help you with your reading conferences. So these have the full page. These also have the little ones that are good for those binder rings I was showing you. So good for conferences when you're working one-on-one and you just want to be here, work on the strategy, and then they get to keep it on their ring. I also have some just fun bookmarks in these, reminders for them of strategies. And then some of these are write-on bookmarks, which is great for reading response where, they're working on this strategy and they actually write on the bookmark. That's something that you can use for accountability. And as I said, there's some assessment tools, not as specific as the shared reading units, but anecdotal notes about little checklists for comprehension, fluency, things you can circle as you're doing your reading conferences, and then also prompts to help you start your reading conferences. So that is our giveaway. Let me go ahead and pull names now. The way this works is I will pull names and I'll also read email addresses because sometimes we have like more than one Lisa or more than one Sarah in here. And I'm going to ask that we just keep the chat box clear for the winners. And I'm going to need my winners, if and only if you hear your name, to just let me know that you're here so that I know you're here live and eligible to win. But then I'm also going to need you to let me know if you want, and I'll put this slide back up again so you can look at it more closely, but the shared reading strategy lessons, the shared reading bundle, or if you want the reading workshop toolkit, you can let me know what you would most like to have, and then also grade level. So winners are going to need to email me that. My first winner is Freda, FSHATARA at, it looks like UMich, University of Michigan.edu. Freda, let me know if you're here. My next winner is Angie, Angie.caron at usask.ca. Angie, let us know if you're here. Next winner is Linnell, LREAGH at pwsd.ca. Linnell, let us know if you're here. Those two Canadian winners. Lauren, L. Ward at bartlettschools.org. Lauren, let us know if you're here. Lori, LKAHL2000 at gmail.com. Gonna pull a couple more. Beth Petersby at unionrxi.org. Beth, let us know if you're here. Sherry, I think I'm saying that right. CHERIE Aniceto at yahoo.com. Sherry, let us know if you're here. And then last but not least, Eve, ABIETTE at hotmail.com. So congrats to my winners. Winners, make sure that you email me. Let me know which resource you want, what grade you want. I do, for everybody else, have these on sale through this Friday. I'll put up the link for you. These are in my Teachers Pay Teachers store, Learning at the Primary Pond, and I will email that link out for you. But again, these are the shared reading units that are a little bit more support, and then these are full of additional visuals if you feel like you're good on your lesson plans. So these are all 20% off, and that sale automatically turns off at midnight Eastern time on this Friday. Alrighty, let's go ahead and do the freebie and more questions. If I did miss your question earlier, feel free to retype it so that I can answer it, because sometimes it doesn't allow me to scroll down a lot, which is annoying, but I do want to hear your questions. So I'd love for you to stick around and ask. Here's the freebie. If it does not work for you for some reason, you will be emailed it. I don't remember what time I set it up to go out, but probably like 45 minutes from now, you'll be emailed the freebie. For attending live, you get a certificate emailed to you. You get the link, the discount link for this stuff emailed to you. And then as long as it's recorded correctly, knock on wood, you will also get that. And all of that stuff, feel free to share. You know, I don't mind if you share the freebie, forward it on to other teachers. The more the merrier. It's not a TPT product. Obviously, TPT products you can't share, but this kind of thing, like the recording, you can send it to your teammates. The freebie, send it to your teammates. Like, please feel free to share that stuff. The recording will be, I think you can watch it for a week from today. So feel free to share that. That will get emailed to you. If you don't get anything from me and it's like tomorrow, then feel free to just email me. You can respond to any of those like reminder emails. Even though it doesn't come directly from me, it goes to my inbox when you respond. So feel free to email me if you are missing the links that are supposed to come to you. If you have to leave, thank you so much for being here. And I appreciate you. And I appreciate you sticking around after time. But I would like to answer some questions. So go ahead and type those questions that I missed into the chat box, because I know I did miss some and I apologize for that. Andrea, good. I'm glad it was helpful. Thank you, Kelly. Andrea, you're welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Alicia. Oh, thank you, Janice. Christy, I don't have the bookmarks separate. They're in the reading workshop toolkit. Susan says, I've heard shared reading bundles rock. Thank you. Patty says, are your lessons prepared for suggested trade books? So yeah, I do. They're general, but I use examples. So I say, you can use this book. And if you're using that book, you might say this and do this. But then I also say, well, if you're using this book, another suggested text, you would do this. But I try to make it general so that whatever I'm suggesting books that we use, you can also just pull your own. And I always describe for this week, if you want to use your own book, this is the type of book that you would need to pull. So I try to make it general like that because I know sometimes it can just be hard to find books. Adriana, unfortunately, I don't have, I do have something in Spanish for my bilingual teachers. It's not this exact same thing, but let me pull up the link for you real quick because I do have some reading strategy visuals in Spanish. Okay, questions. Maria, do you prefer guided reading or strategy groups in first grade? I do a lot of guided reading, Maria, in first grade, but once in a while pull in a strategy group. I would say like second grade and up, I tend to do more of. But it also depends on the group of kids, because if I have a group of first graders that I really want to mix up and I have maybe some high flyers, then strategy groups work really well with those kiddos, especially if they're not exactly on the same level. So it just kind of depends on the class. But I would say the older the kids get, the more I use strategy groups, if that makes sense. But I don't not do them in first grade for sure. I am trying to pull up the Spanish resource. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. So if you're a bilingual teacher, I should have put this on here, but I have, and these are also on sale, I have Spanish reading strategy visuals. So I'm going to put that link in the chat for you. Okay. Let's see. Going back down to questions. For everybody who's asking about the certificate, that will be emailed to you. I will put, somebody was asking about the sale link again. I'll put that up. Amanda, what is in your conferring bag? So I usually like to have a couple of books that the kids know pretty well, so that I can refer back to them and use them as an example. Sometimes I'll have a book that the kids don't know, and that's good if I want to teach like a vocabulary strategy or a comprehension strategy for the first read of a book. But I'll have some books in there that I know really well so that I can whip them out and be like, hey, well, you can do this in this book. So I have those in there. I also like to have, if you remember, I showed you those class checklists. I like to have, sometimes I have them in there, but sometimes I have like just a clipboard that I carry around the room with me and I keep them on there. But I want to have those class checklists to like quickly make notes on. Sometimes I'll have some kind of like sheet where I'm keeping track of when I'm seeing kids in conferences, and I believe I put that sheet in your freebie. So there should be, I think, in your freebie where I put like kind of like a checklist to show when you're seeing kids in small groups and one-on-one, so you can kind of balance that. So I usually have something like that in my conferring bag. I'll have those visuals that I was showing you. Like if I'm using the small ones, I'll have those available, like especially the focus strategies that we're really trying to work on, so that I can add them to their binder rings, because they keep their binder rings with strategies in their reading, their book bag or whatever. So I'll have those available. I'm trying to think of what else. This stuff is just from the reading workshop toolkits, is like prompts, how to start a conference. So I don't carry these with me, but you can if you're having trouble getting started with your conferences or knowing what to ask about. I'm trying to think. I think that's usually what I put in the bag. Maybe somebody else uses a conferring bag and can chime in too. Lynette, I'm glad it was helpful. Thank you for coming. Kristen says, ooh, I love the skill continuum on the freebie. Good. Awesome, Jeannie. Thanks for coming. Okay, so Catherine, can you go over your typical plan for Monday through Friday with shared reading? I know you said you start with comprehension, but I didn't get the rest. So honestly, it really depends on the book. But let me go back to this example of nonfiction. On Monday and Tuesday, and I don't remember what strategy I usually use with this, but we worked on some kind of comprehension strategy, and we read half the book on Monday, and then we finished it on Tuesday. And we were working on usually the same strategy both days. The purpose of those 2 days is really just to get the kids to understand the text. Then sometimes I do throw in like a decoding strategy because the kids are encountering the words for the first time. So sometimes it makes sense to throw that in there, but often I'll do a decoding strategy like on Wednesday, because on Wednesday I've done a lot of the work Monday, Tuesday. I want to invite them to read. And so that's a really good time to have them work on decoding strategies because they really are decoding the text. Thursday, Friday, or Wednesday is also a good day for vocabulary strategies because, again, maybe you've read it once and you haven't talked about all the new words, so you can teach that on Wednesday. Again, that is something you can integrate earlier in the week. I know I'm kind of being wishy-washy, but it really just depends on the book and the strategies. So Wednesday can sometimes be vocabulary. Thursday, Friday, often fluency, sometimes vocabulary. And then on Friday, we might do something like act out a story, or we'll take 2 books that we've read recently and compare and contrast them. Or you can even do a little bit of like reader response more so on Friday. So sometimes Friday is a little bit different. So it really depends on the book, but that's kind of how the breakdown goes. I hope that helps. Okay, so Marlise says, are the visuals in the toolkit included in the shared reading lessons like the bookmarks? So Marlise, hi Marlise, by the way. The difference in the strategy visuals. So these up here have the full page ones like this. You could probably shrink it and print multiple ones to a page using Adobe or your printer settings, but they don't have like the small cards. These have the small cards. They have those bookmarks that I was showing you. There's like a couple bookmarks in these, but not a lot. But this is the one that has the smaller visuals. It has the bookmarks, all of that stuff. Hopefully that makes sense. Paige, I'm so glad this was helpful to you. Awesome. Lisa, if you're trying to print the freebie, you may need to do something called print as image. So I wonder if I can show you here. If you're ever having trouble, can you guys see that? Is it showing you? I don't think it's showing you the printer screen, darn it. Okay, so it won't show you this, but if you open in Adobe Reader, make sure you're using Adobe Reader, click print, and then you go to advanced. I know you can't see this, sorry, I don't know why it won't show up. There's a little thing you can check called print as image. So check that, click OK, and then you may have to click on that screen. You should see actual size. I'm sorry, fit. You want to make sure it's on fit so the pages are fit to the screen, but then it should print correctly. If you make sure it's on fit and then you're using the print as image option, it should print okay. Casey says, what do you do with a group of students who are reluctant to choral read? I'm required to do shared reading with my students and some are reluctant to choral read. So Casey, that's a good question. One thing I do just generally is I really use a lot of positive feedback, like, oh, I noticed Paige was reading along and I heard her reading, good job. Or I will, if I have like a child, and I'm kind of thinking more along the lines of kindergarten. I don't know what grade you teach. We can do this in first grade too. I'll have a child who's like not really participating. Like they'll come up and I'll have them use a pointer or like track the print. So they're participating more that way. I might have them turn to a partner and practice reading with just the partner instead of the whole class. Obviously not for a whole book, for like certain parts, but I just provide a lot of really positive reinforcement. And I also have a marble jar for kids for the whole class. And I will say, you know what, like I hear everybody doing a really good job reading. I'm going to add some marbles to your jar. So it's kind of like a work as a group. Like we want everybody reading. I'll mention, hey, do you want to earn some marbles for your jar? Like I want to make sure I can hear everybody reading. So there's a lot of positive reinforcement, and the marble jar helps a little bit. Denise says, what do you do with students who always just guess the words based off the beginning sound? Oh, yeah. So with those kids, couple of things. I will use phonics controlled readers, and that kind of helps because sometimes with the level books, they end up like they're looking at the picture and they're guessing a lot. And it's good for them to use meaning, but we don't want them to guess, of course. So using decodable text where they're forced to decode every word and it's not all, connected to the picture necessarily, that helps. You could also do like articles that don't have a lot of picture work. You can, I'm trying to just think off the top of my head what I usually do with those kids. Oh, another thing I do is have them compare words. So if I have a picture of a pan, I'll put pan, pen, and pat, and they have to choose the word that's correct. That forces them to read all the way through the word. For longer words, the words that end in like ing or ed or s, I teach them to cover up, to look for a special word ending, cover it up, read the base word, uncover the ending, and then read the whole thing. Because I have a lot of kids who tend to like, even if it's beyond the first sound, they'll read the first part and then not read the ending. Let me keep thinking, but those are some strategies that I use. Megan, good. I'm glad it was helpful. Marlise says, if I already have the shared reading lessons, would the toolkit be beneficial to get also? So Marlise, for the toolkit, if you feel like those individual, the small reading cards would be really helpful for your kids to have, and you also like the bookmarks, then yes, there's a ton of stuff in there that you can use that is different from that, but it's kind of up to you. Some of the big strategy visuals like might be duplicated, but you can email me too if you want to talk about that. Elizabeth, you're welcome. Thank you for coming. Okay, Denise says, what do you do with students who are independent readers, read and then meet for guided reading? Yeah, so pretty much no matter what level they're on, I'm always meeting with them for guided reading, not every day, but, a couple times a week. And then with your really high readers, you can always do a little bit more with the strategy groups. Denise, maybe you teach first grade? Just guessing, but, maybe you can do a little more strategy groups where they're bringing their own books and talking about what they're reading and working on one strategy in a group. That's an option too. Ines, I don't have these full plans in Spanish or these, but I did put in the chat here, and I can add it as a sticky note. I did put the Spanish strategy link up there. That's also on sale. Elaine, thank you. I appreciate that. Denise, I did send out the slides beforehand. If they didn't come through to you for whatever reason, I apologize. I'm pretty sure I put them in the email that's coming to you in like half an hour, hopefully. So if you don't get anything by like tomorrow, just email me, reply to that email. I'm happy to answer anything or get you what you need. Andrea, Reading Workshop Toolkit, does the 2-3 version have some of the same things as the K1 version? Yes, there is some overlap, Andrea. Not sure what grades you work with, but maybe let me know and I can help you figure out which one would be better. Alicia says, Alicia, I'm not sure which. I have your guided reading bundle. Is this one different or very similar? So with the guided reading, that's really intended to be, and I don't know, Alicia, if you were talking about the shared reading or the reading workshop. With your guided reading bundle, that's really intended to be small group. And so I have a little bit of strategy instruction in there, but guided reading, I try not to do too much strategy instruction. This stuff here with the shared reading lessons, that's much more modeling. That's whole group. So it is significantly different, yeah. Okay, Cynthia's asking about the skill continuum on the freebie. And I know I couldn't spend much time on this, unfortunately, just because we ran short on time. But the skill continuum has to do with this ladder of skills that I was talking about, where you've got like your main skill that you're focusing on, and you might have some groups in your class that, yeah, you can, teach it whole group, and then you can work on the same thing in small group. But you might have kids that need something more challenging, and you might have kids that need something easier. And so what the skill ladders allow you to do is go up for something more challenging and go down. So I basically just listed related strategies or skills, and for like characters or retelling or whatever. And so what you can do is you can use those and say, okay, if I'm working on one of these in whole group, then here are some supporting strategies that I can use in small group or one-on-one with my kids that are struggling, but still have that big whole group focus that's related. Or here's some things that I can work on with my more advanced kids to challenge them to take it up one level. So hopefully that makes sense. I would like to go more in depth on those one of these days in a workshop. I just feel like I have so much I want to share with you guys. And so I know we didn't talk about that super long. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate you coming. Michelle says, are the flexible shared, sorry, making you dizzy probably by scrolling. Are the flexible shared reading lessons bundled by reading level? So they are related to reading level, but it's more like kindergarten, first grade, and second grade is how I bundled them. So usually with shared reading, I use a book that's 1 or 2 levels higher than what the average kid in the class is reading. Because what I'm doing is on the first couple of days that we're reading a book, I actually do a lot of the work. So they're getting that support. They're getting challenged, right? I don't want to give them a book that's so easy for most of them that they could read it on their own. I want to be challenging them, but I don't want to make it so hard that they can't read along and participate. So that said, the flexibility is there so that you can choose books, being cognizant of what their levels are that are, 1 or 2 above what they're reading at, most of the kids, or an average kid. In kindergarten, we start out at like level A, right? And then we go all the way up to, I don't know, like level E or F, which is not that the kids are reading at that level, but that's a little bit harder than what they can read by the end of the year. You can change that pretty easily by just choosing different books, but that's how it is. And with first grade too, we start out easier and then we get up to like level K, level L by the end of the year. Obviously, we don't start there. And then with second grade, we're at level N or O by the end of the year, but we're working up. So the levels do get increasingly harder throughout the year. Again, you can replace those. And a really good way to look for books by level, if you're like, oh gosh, I need a level C book, go to this website called, make sure I don't tell you the wrong thing, booksource.com. Booksource.com has a search tool that allows you to look for books by level. And it's super useful. There's also the Scholastic Book Wizard, but Booksource has more. So if you are using these lessons, for example, and you're like, okay, well, my kids are doing something, need something a little easier, you can go to booksource.org and look for some examples. And I usually tell you, like, use a book that has text features or whatever. So I give you some guidance if you do need to deviate from the suggested books. Yesenia says, Spanish is taught differently than English. We chunk syllables in Spanish. So I want to know if the strategies that are in Spanish are for teaching Spanish or for teaching reading in English. So Yesenia, some of the strategies are the same as what we do when we're teaching reading in English. But yes, there are strategies. Let me just look at the preview real quick to see. I want to say that I included a list of all the strategies in the preview. I don't know if it'll load for me. Yeah, so for example, I'm just translating this to English, but quickly read each syllable and then blend them together. Or use your finger to read one syllable at a time. So these strategies are specific to teaching in Spanish. Obviously, some of them, like comprehension, are the same, but they are designed for teaching in Spanish. Okay, so Andrea says I could teach second. I would lean toward getting the second, third, but then I worry that I wouldn't have what I need for my lower kids. So Andrea, what I'm going to say is if you want to go ahead and get the second and third, and then you feel like, this, like you look through it, or actually, you know what, Andrea, look at when you go to the preview for the Reading Workshop Toolkits, look at the strategies and see all the lists, because I believe I listed them all out for you. See if you think that would work for your kids. You can also compare with the toolkit for Kinder and First and read all of those strategies too. And then if you're still not sure, you can feel free to email me, but the preview does have all of them listed out. Brenda says, I teach English language learners, which Flexible Pack has most strategies, or are they all similar? So Brenda, I don't remember what grade you said that you teach, but probably if you have English language learners, I would, if you're looking at, okay, so she's looking at the shared reading lessons. Really kind of depends on what reading level they're at. So you might, if you're teaching like second, maybe you can tell me in the chat, Brenda, but your kids are reading at a first grade level, I would get the first grade bundle. If your kids are in, I'm pointing to the wrong ones. If your kids are in first grade, but they're reading at a kinder level, I would get the kinder. It really depends more on what the levels the kids are actually reading that, and then you can match that to the grade level. You're also welcome to email me and be like, hey, my kids are reading at these levels, like which bundle should I get? And I will be able to tell you, I'll be able to match those reading levels, even if you use a different system than what I use, to the bundle that would be good for you. So that's an option too. Happy to chat with you about that via email. All right, well, we have gone an hour and a half. I appreciate you hanging out for extra time. I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to let you go. If I missed your question, I apologize, but do know that you can always email back. Like I said, those reminder emails, if you respond, they will get to my inbox, and so we can chat. Usually it takes me like a day or two to get through emails because sometimes I get a lot. But the email with the freebie, with the certificate, with the slides, with the recording, all of that is coming to you. And again, feel free to share that with your other teammates or any other teachers you know. This workshop, that freebie, that's totally shareable. So feel free to do that. Thanks for hanging out with me for an hour and a half. I hope that this was helpful to you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.